this applies as well. Through words, we should go to emotion. Thank you. Anybody else? I have also kept to 20 words. Yeah.
Hello.
Anybody else?
The chief minister of a province has his own mother language. What is the language of the prime minister of a country?
Just give him a hand. Yeah. Right. Okay. Any other questions? I can't see from here. Yeah. Yes. Lady over here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Upali Oprajita from Carnegie Mellon University. My question is for Dr. Mahapatra. You alluded to translating your own works, and you alluded to translating works, by other writers. Which was the most satisfying and which was more challenging, and why?
To be true to myself, I have always felt...
Is the mic on? Is it audible? Come. Not audible?
To be true to myself, I have felt much better, more competent and happier translating others. But I intend to add two other informations for the general public. You see, Fakir Mohan Senapati's Chamana Atgund is a very well-known classic, was translated much earlier with the title The Stubble Under the Cloven Hoof. Now it was almost unreadable translation. But now 4 persons, I think Jatin is one of them, no? 4 professors have translated them, and it has been Columbia University Press has published one of the best translations one can think of. Then another example I will give you. Many of you know about the Chinese poems translated, Arthur Wallis and Ezra Pound. A good friend of mine who was lecturing in Downing College at Cambridge, and a friend from my Cambridge days who passed away recently, he found out the translations done by Pound and Arthur Wallis, taking particular poems, about 20 poems out of his collection. The collection called Plucking the Rushes. Luckily I got a copy. That you see, once again he picked up himself Chinese and had translated and showed that these translations were totally inadequate. So I believe a good translation is one which perhaps leaves the translator dissatisfied.
There's not only a very modest answer that he's enjoyed translating other people more, but I think also a safe answer in the sense, in many senses. One is, I know about original writers who are translating themselves and they begin writing the novel all over again. They're so unhappy with the original, or they have moved on since then. One example of this is Kurutul and Heather, great novel, one of the great Urdu novels, Aag Ka Darya, River of Fire, self-translated, and it's 2 different texts, especially in the politics of partition. A question particularly welcome for Sachi, Professor Sachidanand Mohanty.
Yeah,
yes.
I have a question for Professor Sachidananda Mohanty.
Is the mic working?
Hello.
Yeah.
I have a question for Professor Sachidananda Mohanty.
Wonderful. How did you know?
I think he very rightly dispelled this myth that there is no distinction between a practicing translator and a theorist of translation. But I want to know how its self-reflexivity, how can it manifest itself in the translation of people who are not academic theorists? Because in the absence of academic theory, self-reflexivity may degenerate into an instinctive response. So could you please throw some light on that?
Thank you, Himanshu. That's an excellent question. How does self-reflexivity operate in the case of the authors who are not there with us and dead and gone? We don't have the benefit of having correspondence with them through email and otherwise. In the first instance, I will say self-reflexivity manifests in the desire not to take a shortcut, not to be dishonest. Because translation, by definition, for example, entails bilingualism and multilingualism. And yet, at least the large number of the readers of translation know only one language. If a translator is a kind of a native informant, then there is a tendency on the part of the translator to use an American expression to pull a fast one, because the reader will not have the source text before them. That's the first instance of self-reflexivity, to check oneself and not to be dishonest. I mentioned about the ethics of a translator. Susan Bassnett, one of the preeminent exponents of translation theory, had told me once in an interview, she said that the question of morality has come back to translation, as it had not come back in such a powerful manner. How does a translator become an honest translator? That he doesn't take shortcut and is not dishonest with regard to language, semantics, vocabulary, and culture. That's the first thing. Now, with regard to the question, the most important question that Himanshu asked, self-reflexivity is manifest not with regard to whether the author is dead and alive, but intertextuality, the heritage, the tradition, the entire body of lineage, for example, that I was talking about, Himanshu. I mentioned Gyanendra Verma is not with us. T.S. Eliot is not there. Ezra Pound is not there. But in a painstaking and elaborate manner, for example, I can try and reconstruct the entire milieu, the entire locale that existed, that underlay the production of Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. That's the nearest that one can do as a cultural critic, as a comparativist. If you recall what I said, to my mind, to be a good translator is to be a good comparativist and to be a good cultural critic. I do hope I have answered your question. Thank you.
The question of morality in translation that Sachi just referred to my mind, is more a question of ethics. Morality may have all kinds of implications, but a translator, above all, has to be ethically true. Not literally true, not metaphorically true, but ethically true to what he translates. There is some doubt about the issue whether there is time for one more question, and I'll play it by ear, and I will listen to the question, and if it is to me, then I will answer it. If it is to them, then I'll close the session.
In that case, sir, I will ask one question to you and one question to Sitakant Mahapatra, sir.
Where are you?
Yeah, I'm here, ma'am. Sir,
yeah, okay.
You can see me.
Yeah.
So, first question to Sitakant Mahapatra, sir. I'm a great admirer of his. Now, sir, we would have translated some of your own works, if I'm correct. Translated some of your own works. Now, when you translated your works, were you working as a single entity or as a dual entity?
On behalf of Sitakant Mahapatra, I wish to say that he thinks that we should now conclude the session. Yeah, I think when you translate yourselves, then about the two identities of the text, something like that.
I believe a translator, a creative writer who takes up his own translation has theoretically and emotionally claimed some kind of a freedom to change here and there. Not to this extent, but so that it becomes a different thing altogether from the original. But some kind of a freedom he takes while translating. Now, this is also a freedom that should not be denied to any translator who is also a creative writer. As far as I am concerned, I believe I have given much less importance to translating than to my own writing. Many of you may or may not know I am a creative writer. Primarily my time is meant for my writing, mainly poetry. But in some peculiar way, I have been drawn to these, particularly the poetry of the oral poetry of the tribes had a special fascination for me. And I translated Gopinath Mohanty because I am too fond of those stories which are rare pieces in Oriya literature. Thank you.
Sir, one more question to Harish sir. I would ask him. So what does it take for a translator to run into the mind of the author?
It takes great effort, but it comes instinctively or not at all. It is empathy, it is affinity to that sensibility, it is belonging to that culture. Not anybody can come along and begin translating with full empathy. Not all of us achieve that all the time, but that should be the effort, that should be the attempt. Thank you very much. It seems to me that we have a choice now. Either we quit with some dignity or we are kicked off stage. So, thank you very much. One thing that I wish to thank the organizers for is not only to bring along Sita Kantaji in this role of talking about translation, self-translation and so on, which is a tremendous bonus to all of us. A writer of his stature talking like this. And within that frame of reference, I wish to thank the organizers also for the fact that they have organized, they have found time for a session on translation by itself. Very often, much too often, translation is taken for granted. The translator's invisibility and translation's invisibility is notorious. But I think the quality of translation, the reach of translation will improve in our whole literary scenario if we bring translation out into the open and put it on the table as a subject to be discussed by itself. This has happened at that festival. I have enjoyed it tremendously. On behalf of the panelists, may I thank the organizers and the audience again. The audience has been getting more and more mature through the day, I feel. Thank you very much for your great cooperation.
Thank you so much, Professor Harish Trivedi, for your wit and humor. And ladies and gentlemen, can we have a big round of applause to our esteemed panelists here for that insightful discussion that we just saw, which surely has changed our perception towards translation. Thank you so much. And with that, I would request Professor Trivedi to kindly present mementos to Sitakanta Mahapatra. So can we have a big round of applause for Sitakant Mahapatra? And Mr. Sachidanand Mohanty. While I request Professor Mohanty to kindly present a memento to Professor Trivedi. Okay. So we have Mr. Sitakant Mahapatra presenting a memento to Professor Trivedi. Thank you, thank you. So ladies and gentlemen, let's really hear it louder. That was simply a fantastic session.
Panelist, it was really inspiring, Professor, wonderful. And I loved the pot shots you took at the organizers, but we just love you. That's perfectly justified. We're going to move on now without any break because we have lots more in store for you, which I'm sure you are going to enjoy and you're going to relish and you're going to like very much. Okay, so don't go anywhere. This is not a warning, but this is a request, because what's coming up next is something absolutely sensational. Okay, so we want you to be here, and we want you to enjoy yourselves, and we promise you the next session is going to be truly, truly memorable. So please don't go anywhere. Thank you. Well, the stage is set for one of the high points of this wonderful program. I hand you over to Mr. Dilip Kumar and Ms. Shabana Azmi. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, isn't it a great feeling to be here with Ms. Shabana Azmi? Shabana ji, we are really privileged, honored and deeply delighted to have you with us here. And we thank you that you could take time to grace this and enrich this event.
Thank you.
We all know, ladies and gentlemen, that Ms. Azmi has had a huge body of work in art, films, and social change. I'm going to start by asking a very broad question to her. The theme of this event has been harmony. May I ask you, Shabana ji, that we are a great country of huge diversities. Where do you think, what do you think we have done right, and where do you think we still need to do a lot of things to further harmonize intercaste, interregional, interlanguage relationships?
Well, if you look at India's strength is her diversity. And we keep talking about unity in diversity. But the fact is that to strengthen a democracy, the most important thing we need is to understand that there are differences and then to develop socially acceptable behavior that deals with that difference. We have a wonderful constitution, and secularism is a very strong pillar of that constitution. If we look at India and her strength, it is really her composite culture which sets her apart from other countries, particularly in the region. And I think it's extremely important that we speak the language of harmony, because I don't think there is an option. I don't think that we can survive as people in neighborhoods, in cities, in countries, in regions, or the world, if we don't basically work for harmony. Now, I do believe that the common man on the street in India is a secular person and wants harmony, but there are various factors that come into play that are responsible for some of the things that we do. I mean, we have to recognize that just yesterday, 6th December was the 20th year of the Babri Masjid demolition, one of the blackest spots on India's history since independence. And we must take a pledge that we will never allow such a thing to happen. But the thing is that communalism seeps into us and we do not even become aware of it. And I think the time has come that we must pledge ourselves to rooting out communalism of all kinds from within us. There is a saying that if you put a frog in hot water, the frog will jump out and save itself. But if you put a frog in lukewarm water and then slowly turn the temperature on, the frog doesn't realize it and ultimately dies. Communalism in our country is that water which is slowly the temperatures turning on, and we aren't aware of the dangers of it. And I think it's important for us to become aware of it and pledge that we will not allow communal disharmony to take place, and we will respect diversity, and that pluralism and an embrace of pluralism should be our motto. Thank you.
Shabani, you had a sterling lineage, and you attained great success and height in your film career. I think 5 national awards, innumerable film awards, so many other awards in films and theatre. I mean, you could have continued there. I mean, there are 2 things which intrigue me looking at your film and theatre career. One is that how could you emulate or emote such suffering of women in your films? I mean, that is one. And the second is, what prompted you to also start or give more importance to become an activist, to start some kind of social change?
Well, I was raised in a family where both my parents, my father, the noted Urdu poet Kaifi Azmi, and my mother, well-known theatre actress Shaukat Kaifi, believed that art should be used as an instrument for social change. My father was a member of the Communist Party, and he was part of the Progressive Writers Movement. He was the head of Indian People Theatres Association, and they were progressive, liberal people. My mother is still with me. And the atmosphere that I grew up in, I think it was inevitable that I would tread the path that they had shown me. I think what actually happens is, for any sensitive artist, it's not possible to treat your work like a 9-to-6 job. You can't say that I will play a character who's standing up against social injustice from 9 in the morning to 6 at night, and then come back at home to your air-conditioned luxury and say that I will not have anything to do with the characters that I play. So as a result, A, of my background, and B, of the kind of films that I was doing, a point came when I could no longer keep away from issues of social justice, that they had to permeate into the work that I was doing. I remember that in the early 80s, I was working in a film called Earth. Did any of you see Earth? Okay. So, Earth was a film which was, at that time, a very path-breaking film. And I suddenly found that I had women coming to my house after that movie, not as stars to fans, but in sisterhood, expecting me to resolve all their marital conflicts. And of course I was very frightened by that, because I was merely an actor and I'd done a job. And I didn't realize at that time what an overwhelming impression it can leave behind on the audiences. And in fact, that marked the beginning of my involvement with the women's movement. I think people who are known, celebrities in any field, have a huge advantage because people listen to them. And I think it would be very sad if we let that opportunity that we are given by the very people who make us who we are, because they love us so much. And if we let that opportunity go and not do something that is constructive in society, then for somebody like me, it would be a difficult call. And so, having grown up in that kind of atmosphere, having done the movies that I have, I think it was inevitable that I would, because my work as an actor And my work, whether it's with the slum dwellers in Mumbai or whether it's with women's issues or the girl child, is not separate from each other. It is a world vision. It's a world view that I have. And then these are various aspects through which that world view is expressed.
Yes, and I must say that I cannot resist the temptation of telling you that you asked the wrong question. You should have asked, has anyone not seen Earth? I mean, it's such a classic. Coming on a serious note, you know, I always say that to measure the economic activity of a country, you have GDP, you have various other indices. As you say, art could be and should be a part of change, a means for social change. But, you know, unfortunately, we cannot measure the increase in art activity. We have no index to measure. Do you think that in our pursuit for greater economic goals, which is, there is nothing wrong, have we by chance given a slight backseat to art activity and art development?
You know, I'm often asked the question, in what way does an artist contribute to society? How do you compare an artist's contribution with, let's say, the contribution of a doctor or a scientist? I mean, doctors actually save lives. Scientists carry it forward. So I think it's an unfair question because it's really about comparing apples with oranges. But I do believe that art has an extremely important role to play because art, whether it's films, movies, fine arts, theatre, literature, has the possibility to create a climate of sensitivity in which it is possible for change to occur. If you look at what we are suffering as a society, a lot of that has got to do with the fact that we are trapped in a mindset that is set in an almost feudal structure in a patriarchal mindset. And we need to change that if we are to move forward and if we have to be called a world power, then there are certain ingredients that are so deeply instilled in us that we need to change. And art can produce mindset change. And so that's why I think it's on par with all the contributions that all the other people make.
Sure.
If you hadn't clapped, I would have forced you to clap. That's a really good answer.
Shivani, your film and theatre have been your forte, and I somehow sensed that your first love probably is theatre. Am I right in assuming? I said film and theatre have been your forte, and you have been absolutely wonderful in both of them, in the film acting and the theatre. But I somehow sense...
You don't seriously expect me to say, yes, I've been wonderful in both, do you?
Yes, but do I sense that your first love probably is theatre?
No, it's cinema.
It's cinema.
It is cinema. Although I was brought up in a family of theatre, I received my training at the Film Institute in Pune. I'm a firm believer in training. A lot of people say, oh, you don't need training, you can just get up there and they put the names of Dilip Kumar and Amitabh Bachchan and say they didn't go through any training and they're such good actors. And of course they are. But I believe that had they gone through training, they would have been even better actors. So I'm a firm believer in training. And I was trained at the Pune Film Institute. And my basic core is that of a cinema actor. But I enjoy theatre. I enjoy theatre because it keeps me on my toes. And I think if actors could have the luxury of working both in theatre and in film, that would be the most brilliant combination.
Yeah, I happened to see your play Broken Images about a year and a half back at Nehru Center.
That's right.
2 years back. Those in the audience who have not had the chance to see, if ever there is something which happens here, you must see it. For the sheer charisma of Shabana ji and such a long play, I mean, I actually was stunned. And I came out saying, how could she remember so many lines?
That's what we do.
It's amazing. You must see it. Although by saying that your first love is cinema, you have put me a little off rail because my follow-up question was on theatre, but I'll still go ahead. You see, what we find today is that literature is going places because of social media, and so many people can blog, and technology is, actually making more readers and more writers. Cinema is evolving at a very fast pace. It has become very huge. But somehow one gets a sense that theatre, and I see there is one very great theatre personality there.
Rajat is here.
Yes. Somehow theatre has not kept pace, if I may say so. That's the perception of many people. Has it been slow in adopting the modern technology, or is it that the logistics or the commercials of it is not working? Maybe you could like to throw some light on that.
No, I think it's the writing. I think in India, we need much more original writing. I think that's where the problem lies, not in technology. We are able to embrace technology. We don't have the kind of money that is needed, but wherever we've needed to, we have. So what we really need to encourage, and it surprises me because we have such richness in literature, and literature is such a good base for theatre, all over the country, even in regional languages, etc. And we haven't drawn enough from there. And I think that, unfortunately, I don't think writers are given their due in our society. And it doesn't become feasible. You see, even when I look at film, for instance, we spend so much money in marketing the film, but so little money in developing the script.
Absolutely.
And how do you expect a writer to invest all her time and money in writing a script if there is no monetary gain from it? Because that's what she does for a living. That's what he does for a living. So you have to spend money on script development, which might or might not see the light of day. It's very important. What is the point of only putting money into marketing? It just doesn't make sense to me. We need to revisit that.
It's a pity, isn't it, that although we have such good writers, and many of them present here, somehow literature, good writing, good scripting has not gone even into films, which has no dearth of resources, as Shabanaji says.
But I also think, now that this is a literature festival, it's really, really important that we make a great investment in translating all our regional language literature. It's very important. And because, I look at what happened with my mother's book. My mother wrote a book called Yaad Ki Reh Guzar, which means Down Memory Lane. And it was a book in Urdu. It would have remained access for very few had it remained in Urdu. But it got translated into Hindi, Gujarati, Marathi, Japanese, English. The fact that it got translated into English made it accessible. You got Amartya Sen to write a blurb for it. It got selected in 14 universities abroad. And suddenly the expanse was open. Now, of course, they say about translation, that translation is like pouring perfume from one bottle into the other. Some of the fragrance is bound to get lost. But even so, it makes work accessible. And I think as a society, we need to put money into translating regional works into various languages interchangeably.
I may just mention here, just before you came, we had an entire session on translations. Dr. Harish here, who's from Delhi, a professor, and two other panelists spoke great volumes on translations. And in fact, they suggested that sometimes the translations come out better. One more question on the films. We discussed the story side and the acting side, but one thing which really disturbs me as a listener is the quality of lyrics. Today, Indian film industry is there everywhere. There is no wedding which is complete. There is no TV serial which is complete. We still seem to remember the old lyrics. And look at the new lyrics, they are sounding more like advertising. Why you don't like
Fevicol se chipka do tere hood?
They are looking like advertising jingles of Zandu Balm and Fevicol.
For me, imagine
excuse
how
me.
much more painful it is because my father is a lyricist and my husband's a lyricist and my father-in-law was a lyricist. तो सोचिए कि मुझे कितनी तकलीफ होती होगी.
और मुझे I recently discovered, and you must, that Kaifi Azmi Sahab, who probably wrote those lyrics as a pastime or something, or to get some extra, acknowledgement, and Madan Mohan ji have composed such fabulous tunes. और मुझे वो आपको देख के अभी वो एक याद आता है, हम तेरी आंखों के दीवाने हैं.
आप मुझे कॉम्प्लीमेंट पे कर रहे हैं तो डायरेक्टली करिए ना.
A wonderful song, and there we have to listen to Fevicol anyway. So
No, it is a huge pity, and I think there's a basic problem here because we underestimate our audiences. We say that this is what audiences want. I remember when the songs of Vidhu Vinod Chopra's 1942 A Love Story came, they said, that was an all-time low. It was Sarkai Do Khatiya Ke Jada Lage and things like that. And yet Vidhu had the guts to say, no, I want my music to be different. And everybody said it's not going to work. But they put that music, and so you had Ek Ladki Ko Dekha To Aisa Laga, which became such a huge success. So let's not underestimate our audiences. I think another thing that is happening with the more independent films that are being made is that we are becoming shy of using songs in our movies. Lip syncing is going out completely. That was our USP. That is our strength. That is what makes us different from everybody else. And suddenly nobody's lip syncing anymore, and you're using songs in the way that they do in Western movies, which is really like a background score. And what is happening is that the music is overwhelming the words, so you can't even hear the words. So recently, I was so delighted when I heard Talash, because after a very long time, I could actually hear words. And I think that's again something that we are making a mistake, because there's no point in being shy about our songs. That's our USP. That's what makes us different. And look at what Hindi film songs used to do in the past.
Ishq Shawa hai. But वो Ishq Shama, गुलजार साहब का लिखा, आपने सुना?
जी नहीं.
अब जब तक है जान का.
अच्छा.
इश्क शमा, मुश्क शमा, खुशामदीद, मरहबा. अब वो समझ ही नहीं आए शमा क्या है. So sometimes you do get good songs as well. I can see that some of the audience is also very keen to ask some questions.
Ishan, you have to ask me a question. I'm going to send the mic to you. Better prepare your question, okay?
Shan?
He'll do it later. Somebody else. Yes, please. Yes. Somebody has to send a mic there. Isn't there a mic? Don't we have a mic?
Hello. If our neighbors of India are aggressive, how can we make a peace and loving then?
Shavana ji, very welcome to Bhubaneswar and good evening to you. Now, right with this, last month we had an Indian Express had a literary program where we had Amrish Puri, writers we are talking about. The writers which are talking, the present writers which we are talking about. Now, Amrish Puri has got a communist leaning, as you and your parents had towards a communist, you hold a communist party card. Now, he has written the book Shiva Trilogy, the Nagas, and the third book is to be published.
Can you just hold the mic a little away? I can't understand what you're saying.
Thank you. I don't know how to hold the mic, but I'm not a trained artist. Hello. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now, regarding the latest present writers, Amrish Puri is the current present writer. He has a communist leaning. His parents are Brahmins, but he does believe in God. But he has written a book on Shiva Trilogy. It's a Hindu mythology. 2 of his books are published, and the third book is to be published in November. I don't know if it is published now or it will come out in.
I don't know what it is. You take his question and meanwhile we'll ask someone else. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. We'll take your question. Ma'am, आप पूछिए. आप पूछिए.
Yes.
No, she wants to ask.
Sure. Thinking that you were going to talk. Can you hear me? About poverty and so on. And one of the things that does strike me as somebody who's lived outside of this country for a very long time is that middle class India does not address issues. The whole obsession with consumption, which seems to drive middle class India today. What's your take on that? That is a change. It's a very dramatic change from when I left India.
I really think it's for political parties. If you're dealing with issue of poverty,
yes.
If you're dealing with poverty, then it really is for the country's policy makers to make sure that the model of development that they are following alleviates poverty. Unfortunately, the model of development we are following makes the rich richer and the poor poorer. And so necessarily the biggest beautiful syndrome is something that we need to revisit and look at alternative models of development. With the middle class, I wouldn't paint the entire middle class as being insensitive and heartless, but these are transition moments in society. And what happens is in moments of transitions, you want to leave behind something that you cannot deal with. And so that's why I'm saying it's for the policy makers to make policy, because there is no point in touting that we are becoming a world power if the fruits of our economic progress doesn't reach out to the poorest of the poor. And I mean, that's what Mahatma Gandhi said. So that's where our constitution was formed, and we have to be true to our own constitution. And so instead of only being concerned with the section on which India's sun shines, we have to look at the other sections. And unless we can make the sun shine on the poorest, our progress is really of no value at all. Because it will create, because let me tell you, that when I look at India, I see one of the biggest challenges that she faces ahead in her mark towards economic progress is that we'll have to put into place large infrastructure projects that will necessarily displace people. Now, unless the principle of social justice is involved in the rehabilitation and resettlement of people, you will create so much social discord that there is no way that that progress is going to be meaningful for the country.
I'm just going to add something to that. I organized a retrospective of your films at the Carnegie Museum. And so the next time, that's in Pittsburgh, and the next time I do that, I hope you'll be able to come.
Is that a threat?
It is a threat, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Harish.
Shabana ji, let me begin by paying you a direct compliment, which is there are two Shabanas. You were an actress, and you were admired very widely and loved, and you also turned out to be one of the most articulate and thoughtful people from the film industry that we have. But this coincidence, my question is about something that you said a little while ago, about how you have an opportunity, you are known publicly, and therefore you have an opportunity and an obligation, as you put it, to intervene in public discourse.